You won't believe what I found when I opened the door to my villa that morning. For weeks, I'd been looking forward to this trip. A quiet weekend at the house I'd poured my heart and soul into, nestled on the edge of the lake. Surrounded by the kind of peace you can only find when the world finally leaves you alone. I'd imagined the gentle hush of the water, the scent of pine drifting through the open windows, the familiar creak of the old wooden floors beneath my feet. I'd pictured myself sitting on the porch with a cup of coffee, watching the sun rise, feeling, if only for a moment, that all the years of hard work and sacrifice had been worth it. Instead, as I pulled into the driveway, I was greeted by a sight that made my heart sink. Cars, at least half a dozen of them, were scattered haphazardly across the lawn, their tires digging ugly ruts into the grass I'd spent years coaxing back to life. Music thumped from inside, so loud I could feel the bass in my chest before I'd even reached the front steps. The air was thick with the smell of beer and something burnt, and as I got closer, I could hear the raucous laughter of young men who had clearly made themselves at home. I paused at the door, my hand trembling on the handle. For a moment, I wondered if I'd made a mistake, if I'd gotten the dates wrong, or if my daughter had planned a surprise. But no, I'd told her I was coming. She'd even sounded pleased, or at least polite, when I'd mentioned it on the phone. There was no reason for anyone else to be here. This was my sanctuary, my reward for decades of putting everyone else first. I opened the door, and the scene that greeted me was worse than I could have imagined. My living room, was a disaster. Empty bottles littered every surface. Someone had tracked mud across the rug I'd brought back from Morocco. The coffee table was covered in greasy pizza boxes and half-eaten wings. And there, sprawled across my favorite armchair, was my son-in-law, beer in hand. Laughing with a group of his friends as if he owned the place, he didn't even notice me at first. None of them did. They were too busy shouting over each other, arguing about whose turn it was to play some idiotic drinking game. I stood there, invisible in my own home, my heart pounding in my chest. I wanted to scream, to demand an explanation, but all I could do was stare, frozen by a mixture of disbelief and anger. Finally, my son-in-law glanced up, his eyes widening in surprise. "Oh, hey. Didn't know you were coming this weekend?" he slurred, as if that excused everything. His friends barely looked at me, a few offering half-hearted waves before turning back to their conversation. I felt a wave of humiliation wash over me. This was supposed to be my retreat, my reward for a lifetime of sacrifice. Instead, it had been invaded, disrespected, turned into a playground for people who saw it as nothing more than a free party venue. I looked at my son-in-law, this man I'd welcomed into my family, trusted with my daughter's happiness, and saw not a partner, but an opportunist, someone who took without a second thought. In that moment, something inside me shifted. The pain of betrayal was sharp, but beneath it, a new resolve began to take root. I knew, as I stood there in the ruins of my peace, that things could not go on like this. And as I closed the door behind me, the music and laughter echoing in my ears, I promised myself this would be the last time anyone treated me or my home. This way, it's strange how a single moment of disrespect can cast a shadow over years of love and sacrifice. As I stood in the chaos of my once peaceful villa, I couldn't help but remember how much this place had meant to me and to my family. The villa wasn't just a house. It was the culmination of decades of hard work, late nights, and dreams deferred. It was the promise I made to myself as a young parent, scraping by in a cramped apartment, that one day I would give my family a place where we could all breathe, laugh, and belong. I still remember the first time I saw the property. The house was nothing special then, just a tired old structure with peeling paint and a sagging porch, surrounded by wild grass and tangled shrubs. But I saw potential. I saw the way the morning sun lit up the lake, the way the trees whispered in the breeze, the way the world seemed to slow down as soon as you stepped onto the land. I saw a future here, one where my children could run barefoot through the grass, where we could gather for birthdays and holidays, where laughter would echo off the walls for generations. Buying the villa wasn't easy. It meant years of saving, saying no to things I wanted, and working overtime shifts when my body begged for rest. I remember clipping coupons, patching up old clothes, and driving the same battered car long after it should have been retired. There were nights when I lay awake worrying about bills, wondering if I was being foolish to chase a dream that always seemed just out of reach. But every time I thought about giving up, I pictured my family gathered around a big table, the smell of home-cooked food in the air, and I pressed on. When we finally signed the papers, I cried, not out of relief, but out of pride. I'd done it. I'd given my family a gift that would outlast me, a place to call our own. The first summer, we worked together to fix up the house. My daughter painted the shutters a cheerful blue. My son-in-law, back when he was still eager to impress, helped me sand the floors and repair the porch. We planted a garden, built a fire pit, and hung a swing from the old oak tree out back. Every improvement, every blister and sore muscle felt like an investment in our future. The villa quickly became the heart of our family. Every holiday, every milestone, every ordinary weekend seemed brighter here. I can still hear the echoes of laughter from those early years. My daughter and her cousins chasing fireflies at dusk. My wife humming in the kitchen. The clink of glasses as we toasted another year together. We hosted barbecues, birthday parties, and even a few weddings. Friends and neighbors would drop by. I was drawn by the warmth and welcome that filled every room. I was always generous with the villa. I wanted my family to feel that it was theirs as much as mine. When my daughter got married, I offered the house for her bridal shower and let her and her new husband spend their honeymoon here. I remember how grateful she was, how she hugged me and said, "Thank you, Dad. This place feels like magic." I believed her. I wanted her to know that she was loved, that she would always have a place to come home to, even as the years passed and life grew more complicated. I tried to keep the villa at the center of our family. When my wife fell ill, the house became a refuge, a place where we could escape the hospital walls and find a little peace. I remember sitting with her on the porch, holding her hand as we watched the sun set over the lake. She told me she was proud of what we'd built, that she hoped our children would cherish it as much as we had. I promised her I would do everything I could to keep the family together, to keep the villa a place of love and belonging. After she passed, the villa became even more precious to me. It was a living memory, a place where I could feel her presence in every room. I poured myself into maintaining it, fixing leaky pipes, repainting walls, tending the garden she loved so much. I invited my daughter and soon-in-law to visit as often as they liked, hoping that the house would help us heal, would keep us close even as the world pulled us in different directions. At first, they seemed to appreciate it. My daughter would call to ask if she could bring friends for the weekend, and I always said yes. I wanted her to feel welcome, to know that the villa was a gift for her as much as for me. My son-in-law, in those early days, was polite and helpful. He'd bring groceries, help with repairs, and thank me for my hospitality. I told myself that I was lucky, that my family was strong, that the sacrifices had been worth it. But slowly, most imperceptibly, things began to change. The requests to use the villa became more frequent and less considerate. Sometimes I'd arrive to find things out of place. A broken glass left on the counter, muddy footprints on the stairs, towels missing from the linen closet. My daughter would apologize, but her husband would just shrug, saying, "It's just a house, right?" I tried to brush it off, telling myself that young people were messy, that it was better to have the house full of life than sitting empty. Still, the little slights began to add up. I'd spend hours cleaning up after their visits, fixing what had been broken, replacing what had been lost. I told myself it was a small price to pay for family togetherness, but a part of me began to feel taken for granted. I started to notice the way my son-in-law talked about the villa, as if it were already his, as if my years of sacrifice meant nothing. He'd joke with his friends about inheriting the old man's lake house, and though he always laughed, there was an edge to his words that made me uneasy. I tried to ignore it, to focus on the good memories, the laughter and love that had filled these walls. But as I stood in the wreckage of my living room, surrounded by strangers who treated my home like a cheap motel, I couldn't help but feel the sting of betrayal. The warmth and pride I'd felt for so many years had been replaced by a cold, hollow ache. I realized with a heaviness I couldn't shake that somewhere along the way, the meaning of this place had been lost. Not just for them, but for me as well. And yet, even in that moment of pain, I remembered why I'd built this villa in the first place. It wasn't just for parties or holidays or even for my own comfort. It was a symbol, a legacy of love, sacrifice, and family. I knew then that I couldn't let that legacy be trampled by carelessness and entitlement. I had to find a way to reclaim what I'd built, to remind my family and myself of the true value of what we had. The villa deserved better. I deserved better. And for the first time in a long time, I was ready to fight for it. My daughter Emily has always been the light of my life. From the moment she was born, she had a way of making the world feel brighter. Her laughter ringing through our home like music. I remember the way she'd curl up beside me on the couch, her small hand wrapped around my finger, asking endless questions about the world. She was curious, kind, and fiercely loyal. A child who wore her heart on her sleeve and never hesitated to share it with those she loved. As she grew older, our bond only deepened. We had our rituals, Sunday morning pancakes, long walks by the lake, late night talks on the porch when the world felt too heavy. I tried to teach her the values that had guided me: hard work, honesty, and above all, the importance of family. I wanted her to know that no matter what happened, she would always have a place to come home to. A family that would stand by her through every storm. When Emily met Mark, I was hopeful. He was charming in that easy, affable way that puts people at ease. He'd show up to family dinners with flowers for my wife and a bottle of wine for me, always quick with a compliment or a joke. He seemed genuinely interested in our family stories, asking about the villa's history and listening as I recounted tales of our first summers there. I remember thinking maybe this is the man who will cherish Emily the way she deserves. Their courtship was a whirlwind. Dinners, weekend getaways, and long conversations that left Emily glowing with happiness. When Mark proposed, she called me in tears, her voice trembling with joy. "Dad, I've never been so sure of anything," she said. I gave them my blessing, believing that together they would build a life filled with the same love and respect I'd tried to model in the early days of their marriage. Mark made an effort to fit in. He'd help with chores at the villa, offer to run errands, and even joined in our family traditions. I remember one 4th of July he organized a fireworks show on the dock. His enthusiasm infectious as he handed out sparklers to the kids. For a while it felt like we were all part of something special. A new generation carrying forward the legacy of family and togetherness. But as time passed, subtle changes began to creep in. Mark's charm, once so genuine, started to feel rehearsed. He'd make offhand comments about the villa, joking about upgrading the kitchen or turning the guest room into a game room for his friends. At first, I laughed along, thinking he was just trying to make the place his own. But the jokes became more pointed, the suggestions more insistent. He'd talk about the house as if it were already his, making plans without asking, inviting friends for weekends without checking with me. Emily, ever the peacemaker, tried to smooth things over. "He just wants to feel included, Dad," she'd say, her eyes pleading for understanding. I wanted to believe her. I wanted to trust that Mark's intentions were good, that he valued the villa and our family as much as I did. But the unease in my chest grew with every passing visit. Family traditions, once sacred, began to shift. Our Sunday pancake breakfasts became rare, replaced by rushed meals or skipped altogether when Mark decided to sleep in. The long walks by the lake dwindled, Emily often distracted by her phone or Mark's plans with his friends. Even our holiday gatherings changed. Mark would invite his buddies to join us, turning intimate family dinners into loud, crowded affairs where I felt more like a host than a father. I tried to adapt, telling myself that families evolve, that new traditions could be just as meaningful as old ones. But the sense of connection I'd cherished began to fray. I'd catch glimpses of the daughter I knew, a quick smile, a gentle touch on my shoulder. But she seemed further away, pulled in directions I couldn't follow. The real turning point came one summer when Mark asked if he and his friends could use the villa for a guy's weekend. I hesitated, explaining that I'd planned to do some repairs and was looking forward to a quiet weekend alone. Mark brushed off my concerns, insisting that they'd take good care of the place and that I could always come another time. Emily, caught in the middle, urged me to let them have their fun. "It's just one weekend, Dad. You deserve a break." Reluctantly, I agreed, wanting to keep the peace. But when I returned the following week, I found the house in disarray. Muddy footprints on the stairs, empty beer cans in the garden, and a broken lamp in the living room. Mark apologized, but his words felt hollow, his eyes already darting to his phone as if he had more important things to do. Emily tried to help me clean up, her face flushed with embarrassment. But I could see the strain in her smile. From that point on, the pattern repeated. Mark and his friends treated the villa as their personal playground, showing little regard for the effort and love that had gone into making it a home. Emily, torn between loyalty to her husband and respect for her family, grew quieter, her visits less frequent and more hurried. I felt the distance growing, a chasm opening between us that I didn't know how to bridge. Still, I held on to hope. I told myself that things would get better, that Emily would remember the values we'd shared, that Mark would come to appreciate the villa as more than just a party house. But with each new slight, each careless remark, my disappointment deepened. The warmth and connection that had once defined our family began to fade, replaced by a growing sense of unease and loss. Looking back, I see now that the signs were there all along. The subtle entitlement, the disregard for tradition, the slow erosion of respect. I wanted so badly to believe in the best of my family, to trust that love and patience would be enough. But as I stood in the ruins of my living room, surrounded by strangers in a house that no longer felt like home, I realized that hope alone would not be enough to heal what had been broken. Something had to change, and for the first time, I was ready to face that truth. Looking back, I should have seen the warning signs. They weren't always loud or obvious. Sometimes they were just small cracks in the foundation. Little moments that left me unsettled but not quite angry enough to speak up. At first, I told myself I was being too sensitive, that I should be grateful my daughter and her husband wanted to spend time at the villa at all. But as the months went by, those cracks widened, and the sense of unease grew harder to ignore. It started with the unannounced visits. I'd drive up to the villa for a weekend of quiet, only to find Mark's car already in the driveway, sometimes with 2 or 3 others parked beside it. I'd walk in to find him and his friends sprawled on the couch, watching sports or playing video games, the kitchen counters littered with empty snack bags and half-finished drinks. They'd greet me with casual waves, as if I were the guest and they were the hosts. "Hey, hope you don't mind. We thought we'd get a head start on the weekend," Mark would say, not bothering to ask if I'd had other plans. At first, I tried to brush it off. I told myself that sharing the villa was part of being a good parent, that I should be happy to see the place filled with laughter and life. But it was hard to ignore the growing sense that my generosity was being taken for granted. I'd find towels left in damp piles on the bathroom floor, muddy shoes abandoned by the door, and dishes stacked in the sink as if someone else would come along to clean up. Once, I discovered a cigarette burn on the arm of my favorite chair, a careless mark that no one bothered to mention, let alone apologize for. The comments started soon after. Mark would joke with his friends about their future lake house, nudging Emily and winking as if it were all in good fun. "Better take care of the place, boys. One day, it'll be ours," he'd say, raising his beer in a mock toast. His friends would laugh, sometimes chiming in with their own suggestions for renovations or parties they'd throw. When the old man finally hands over the keys, I'd force a smile, trying to convince myself it was harmless banter, but each word felt like a tiny stone in my shoe, irritating, persistent, impossible to ignore. There were other moments, too, that left me questioning my own judgment. I'd come up to the villa after a long week, looking forward to a quiet evening, only to find the fridge emptied of groceries I'd stocked, or the firewood pile depleted after a late-night bonfire I hadn't been invited to. Once, I found a group of Mark's friends fishing off the dock, their laughter echoing across the water as they tossed empty cans into the reeds. When I asked them to clean up, they shrugged and told me not to worry, that the lake would take care of it. Emily, for her part, seemed caught in the middle. She'd apologize for the messes. Promised to talk to Mark about asking before bringing friends, but nothing ever really changed. I could see the strain in her eyes, the way she tried to smooth things over, to keep the peace between her husband and her father. I wanted to believe that things would get better, that Mark would learn to respect the boundaries I'd tried so hard to set. But with each new incident, my patience wore thinner. The worst part was the way I began to doubt myself. Was I being too rigid, too old-fashioned? Was it wrong to expect a certain level of respect for the home I'd worked so hard to build? I'd lie awake at night, replaying conversations in my head, wondering if I should have spoken up sooner, if I was somehow to blame for letting things get this far. But the truth was, I was afraid. Afraid of confrontation, of driving a wedge between myself and my daughter, being seen as the unreasonable parent who couldn't let go. So I stayed silent, swallowing my discomfort and telling myself that it was easier to endure a few slights than to risk losing the family I loved. Now, standing in the aftermath of yet another weekend gone wrong, I realize how much those early red flags mattered. Each small act of carelessness, each thoughtless comment was a warning. A sign that the boundaries I'd tried to set were being slowly, steadily eroded. I wish I'd had the courage to speak up sooner, to insist on the respect I deserved. But hindsight, as they say, is always clearer than the present. And as I looked around at the mess left behind, I knew that something had to change. Before the cracks became too deep to repair, the day that changed everything began like any other. I'd spent the morning running errands in town, picking up groceries and a few supplies for the villa. I was looking forward to a quiet evening, maybe grilling on the porch, reading a book by the fire, and enjoying the simple pleasure of solitude. The air was crisp, the sky a perfect blue, and for a moment, I allowed myself to believe that peace was still possible. But as I turned onto the gravel drive, my heart began to race. Even from a distance, I could see something was wrong. Cars, more than I'd ever seen at the villa, were parked haphazardly across the lawn, their tires digging deep ruts into the grass. Music thumped from inside, so loud it rattled the windows. The air was thick with the smell of smoke and spilled beer, and as I stepped out of my car, I could hear the unmistakable sound of shouting and laughter. Dozens of voices, none of them familiar. I hurried to the front door, my hands shaking. I fumbled with my keys, but before I could unlock the door, it swung open, and a young man I'd never seen before stumbled out, a red plastic cup in hand. He barely glanced at me, muttering something under his breath as he pushed past. Leaving the door wide open behind him, inside, chaos reigned. My living room, my sanctuary, had been transformed into a scene from a college frat party. Strangers lounged on my furniture, their feet propped up on the coffee table, drinks in hand. Someone had spilled something sticky on the rug, and a group of young men were arguing over a game of cards, their voices rising above the blaring music. The kitchen was worse, counters covered in empty bottles, pizza boxes stacked in the sink, and a trail of muddy footprints leading out to the back deck. I stood frozen in the doorway, my mind struggling to process what I was seeing. Every detail felt like a personal insult. The broken lamp in the corner, the cigarette butts ground into the carpet, the family photos knocked askew on the mantel. I felt like a stranger in my own home, invisible and powerless. And then I saw Mark, my son-in-law, at the center of it all. He was holding court in the dining room, surrounded by his friends, laughing and gesturing with a beer in hand. He looked up and saw me, his expression shifting from surprise to annoyance in an instant. "Oh, hey," he called, his voice slurred. "Didn't know you were coming up this weekend? You should have texted." I stared at him, unable to find the words. My hands clenched at my sides, my heart pounding in my chest. What is going on here? I finally managed, my voice barely above a whisper. Mark shrugged as if the answer were obvious. "Just having a little get-together. No big deal. Relax. It's just a house." Just a house. The words echoed in my mind, each one a fresh wound. I looked around at the mess, the strangers, the destruction, and felt something inside me break. This wasn't just a house. It was my home, my legacy, the place I'd built with my own hands and filled with memories. It was the last piece of my wife I had left, the place where I'd hoped to grow old, surrounded by family and love. I tried to keep my composure, but the pain was overwhelming. "You had no right," I said, my voice trembling. "You didn't ask. You didn't even tell me you were coming?" Mark rolled his eyes, turning back to his friends. "Chill out, man. We'll clean up. It's not like anything's broken." But things were broken, more than he could ever understand. I walked through the house in a daze, taking in the damage. The guest room door was off its hinges, the bathroom mirror cracked, and the garden I'd spent years tending was trampled and littered with trash. In my bedroom, I found someone asleep on my bed, their shoes still on, a half-empty bottle of whiskey on the nightstand. I felt sick, violated in a way I'd never known before. I wanted to scream, to throw them all out, to demand respect for everything I'd given. But as I stood there, surrounded by the ruins of my peace, I realized that anger alone wouldn't fix what had been broken. I felt humiliated, powerless, and utterly alone. The people I loved most had allowed this to happen, had treated my home as nothing more than a place to party and destroy. I found Emily in the backyard, her face pale and drawn. She looked at me with tears in her eyes, whispering apologies I could barely hear over the noise. "I didn't know it would get this out of hand," she said. "I'm so sorry, Dad." I wanted to comfort her, to tell her it wasn't her fault, but the words caught in my throat. I could see the guilt and shame in her eyes, the way she shrank from Mark's laughter and the chaos around her. For the first time, I realized how trapped she must have felt, caught between loyalty to her husband and love for her family. As the party raged on, I retreated to the porch, my mind racing. I thought about all the years I'd spent building this home, all the sacrifices I'd made, all the love I'd poured into every corner. I thought about my wife, about the promise I'd made to keep our family together, to protect the legacy we'd built. And I thought about Mark, his careless words ringing in my ears. "It's just a house." In that moment, something inside me hardened. The pain and humiliation gave way to a cold, steely resolve. I realized that I couldn't let this continue, not for my sake, not for Emily's, and not for the memory of the woman I'd loved. I had to reclaim my home, my dignity, and my place in this family. I had to show them all that respect wasn't optional, that boundaries mattered, and that love without respect was nothing at all. As the sun set over the lake, casting long shadows across the battered lawn, I made a silent promise to myself. This would be the last time anyone treated me or my home this way. I would find a way to restore what had been lost, to remind my family of the true meaning of home. And for the first time in a long time, I felt a sense of purpose, a determination that burned brighter than the pain. The time for silence was over. It was time to take back what was mine. After the party, the villa felt emptier than ever. The silence that followed the chaos was not the peaceful kind I'd once cherished, but a heavy, suffocating quiet that pressed in on me from every side. I wandered from room to room, picking up the pieces, literally and figuratively, of what had been broken. Each overturned chair, each stain on the carpet, each dent in the wall seemed to echo the same question. How did it come to this? I found myself replaying the events over and over, searching for the moment when things had started to slip away. Was it the first time I let Mark and his friends stay without asking? Was it when I laughed off his jokes about inheriting the old man's lake house? Or was it simply the slow erosion of boundaries, the way I'd always chosen peace over confrontation, hoping that love and patience would be enough to keep my family together? The truth was, I'd spent my whole life putting others first. It was how I was raised, how I'd survived. I'd worked long hours to provide for my family, skipped vacations so my daughter could have new shoes, and poured every spare dollar and every ounce of energy into making the villa a place of comfort and belonging. I'd told myself that sacrifice was the price of love, that if I just gave enough, forgave enough, everything would work out in the end. But now, standing in the ruins of my sanctuary, I couldn't help but wonder if I'd been wrong. Had my willingness to give been mistaken for weakness? Had my silence been read as permission? I thought about all the times I'd bitten my tongue, swallowed my pride, let small slights go unchallenged for the sake of harmony. I thought about the look in Mark's eyes when he told me to relax, the way he'd dismissed my pain as if it were nothing. I thought about Emily, torn between her husband and her father, and the fear that if I pushed too hard, I might lose her for good. That fear was the hardest to face. Emily was my only child, the last living link to the family I'd built with my wife. The thought of driving her away, of becoming just another bitter old man she avoided out of guilt or obligation, was almost more than I could bear. I wanted to believe that if I just kept giving, kept forgiving, she would eventually see the truth. That respect and love were not the same thing, and that one could not survive without the other. But as the days passed and the villa remained empty, I began to realize that something had to change. I couldn't keep sacrificing my own happiness, my own dignity, for the sake of a peace that was never truly mine. I couldn't keep letting others decide what I deserved, or allow my home to become a symbol of my own inability to stand up for myself. I spent long hours on the porch, staring out at the lake, wrestling with my doubts. I thought about my wife, about the strength she'd shown in the face of illness and loss. She'd always told me that love meant knowing when to say no, when to draw the line. You can't pour from an empty cup, she used to say, her hand warm in mine. You have to take care of yourself. Too, her words echoed in my mind as I watched the sun set, painting the water in shades of gold and crimson. I realized that if I didn't draw the line now, I never would. If I didn't stand up for myself, for the home I'd built, and the values I held dear, then everything I'd worked for would be lost, not just the villa, but the very heart of my family. The decision didn't come easily. I was still afraid of conflict, of rejection, of losing the people I loved most. But beneath the fear, a new resolve began to take root. I owed it to myself, to my wife's memory, and to Emily to reclaim my dignity and set things right. I couldn't change the past, but I could choose what happened next. As the first stars appeared in the evening sky, I made a quiet promise to myself. I would no longer be a bystander in my own life. I would find the courage to speak up, to set boundaries, and to demand the respect I deserved. And no matter how hard it was, I would do it not just for me, but for the family I still hoped to save. In the days that followed, I found myself drifting through the villa like a ghost, weighed down by indecision and doubt. I knew I couldn't keep living like this, trapped between the fear of losing my daughter and the pain of being disrespected in my own home. But the thought of confrontation still filled me with dread. I needed perspective, a voice outside my own echo chamber of regret and worry. So, I picked up the phone and called my older sister, Margaret. She'd always been my confidant, the one person who could cut through my self-doubt with a single well-placed question. When she answered, I tried to keep my voice steady, but she heard the strain immediately. "What's wrong?" she asked, her tone gentle but firm. I told her everything, the party, the mess, Mark's dismissive words, and the ache of feeling like a stranger in my own home. I confessed my fear of losing Emily, my guilt over letting things get this far, and my uncertainty about what to do next. Margaret listened without interrupting, letting me pour out years of frustration and heartbreak. When I finally finished, she was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "You've always put everyone else first. But you can't let people walk all over you, especially not in your own home. Setting boundaries isn't selfish, it's necessary. If you don't stand up for yourself, who will?" Her words struck a chord. I realized how long it had been since I'd allowed myself to consider my own needs, my own right to respect. Margaret reminded me that love and boundaries could coexist. That protecting myself didn't mean shutting out my daughter, but rather showing her what healthy relationships looked like. That night, unable to sleep, I found myself searching online for stories like mine. I read post after post from people who had faced similar struggles. Parents who had been taken for granted, grandparents who had been treated as burdens, people who had finally drawn a line and reclaimed their peace. Their stories were raw and honest, filled with pain but also with hope. Many wrote about the fear of confrontation, the guilt of saying no, and the surprising relief that came with finally standing up for themselves. One story in particular stayed with me. A woman who had spent years letting her adult children use her home as a crash pad, only to realize she was losing herself in the process. She wrote about the moment she changed the locks, the tears and anger that followed, and the eventual healing that came when her family learned to respect her boundaries. "It was the hardest thing I ever did," she wrote, "but it saved my sanity and in the end brought us closer together." Reading those words, I felt a flicker of hope. I wasn't alone. Others had walked this path before me, had faced the same fears and doubts, and had come out stronger on the other side. Their courage gave me courage. Their clarity helped me see that I wasn't just fighting for a house. I was fighting for my dignity, my peace, and the future of my family. By the time the sun rose, I knew what I had to do. I would no longer let fear dictate my choices. With the support of my sister and the wisdom of strangers who had found their own strength, I felt a new sense of empowerment. It was time to take action, to reclaim my home and my self-respect, and to show my family that love, real love, always includes respect. Empowerment, I discovered, is not a sudden thunderclap but a slow, steady rising of resolve. After my conversation with Margaret and the stories I'd read, I felt a new current running through me, one that whispered, "You have a right to your own peace." I realized that if I wanted things to change, I couldn't wait for someone else to fix it. I had to take action, not out of spite, but out of self-respect. The first step was practical. I drove into town and bought a new set of heavy-duty locks for every door and window in the villa. As I installed them, I felt a strange sense of satisfaction, each turn of the screwdriver a small reclaiming of my space. I thought about all the times I'd left the doors open, trusting that my family would treat the villa with the same care I did. That trust had been misplaced, but I wasn't going to let it be my undoing. Next, I called a local security company and arranged for cameras to be installed around the property. The technician, a kind man about my age, didn't ask questions, but I could tell he understood. "You'd be surprised how many people do this for family reasons," he said quietly as he set up the last camera by the back porch. I nodded, grateful for his discretion. The cameras weren't about catching anyone in the act. They were about sending a message. This home is protected. And so am I, but I knew locks and cameras alone wouldn't be enough. I needed to understand my rights, to make sure I was on solid ground if things got ugly. So I made an appointment with a lawyer in town, a woman named Ms. Patel who came highly recommended. I laid out the situation, trying not to let my embarrassment show. She listened carefully, then assured me that as the sole owner of the villa, I had every right to set boundaries and enforce them. "You're not being unreasonable," she said. "You're protecting your property and your well-being. If anyone tries to challenge that, you have the law on your side." Her words were a balm. For the first time in months, I felt the weight of uncertainty begin to lift. I left her office with a folder of documents and a clear understanding of what I could and could not do. I also left with a plan. That evening, I sat at the old oak desk in the study and began to write. I poured my heart into a letter addressed to Emily and Mark, outlining the new boundaries for the villa. I explained, as calmly and clearly as I could, that the house was not a free-for-all, but a family home that deserved respect. I listed the new rules. No guests without permission, no parties, no unannounced visits. I made it clear that any violation would result in immediate loss of access. I also included a copy of the villa's deed, subtle reminder of where the true ownership lay. Writing the letter was harder than I expected. I thought about softening my words, about leaving room for negotiation. But I knew that would only invite more of the same behavior. I needed to be firm, not cruel, and to show that my decision came from a place of love, not anger. I ended the letter with a simple truth. This home is my legacy, and I will protect it, not just for myself, but for the family I hope we can still be. With the letter finished, I turned my attention to the confrontation I knew was coming. I rehearsed what I would say, imagining every possible reaction from Mark's bluster to Emily's tears. I reminded myself that I wasn't doing this to punish them, but to reclaim my dignity and set a standard for how I deserve to be treated. I practiced speaking calmly, refusing to be baited into an argument or guilted into backing down. I also prepared for the practicalities, I made copies of the new keys but kept them in a drawer, ready to give only to those who respected the new boundaries. I set up the security system's alerts on my phone, so I'd know if anyone tried to enter without permission. I even made a list of trusted neighbors who could check on the villa if I was away, just in case. As the days passed, I felt my anxiety give way to a quiet confidence. I was no longer waiting for the next disaster, no longer dreading the sound of my phone or the sight of Mark's car in the driveway. I was taking control not just of the villa, but of my own life. The fear of losing Emily was still there, a dull ache in my chest. But it was tempered by the knowledge that I was finally standing up for myself. The final step was arranging a meeting. I called Emily and asked her to come to the villa with Mark that weekend. My voice was steady, my words measured. "There are some things we need to talk about," I said. She hesitated, sensing the seriousness in my tone, but agreed the night before they arrived. I walked through the villa one last time, taking in the quiet, the order. The sense of peace I'd worked so hard to restore. I thought about all the years I'd spent putting others first, about the pain of betrayal and the slow, steady rise of resolve. I knew the confrontation would be difficult, that there would be anger and tears and maybe even words that couldn't be taken back. But I also knew that I was ready. For the first time in a long time, I felt powerful. Not because I was seeking revenge, but because I was finally honoring my own worth. I was no longer the bystander in my own story. I was the author, and I was writing a new chapter, one where respect was not just asked for, but expected. And as I turned out the lights and climbed into bed, I felt a sense of calm settle over me. The kind that comes from knowing you've done the right thing. No matter how hard it is, you should have seen their faces when I told them what I'd done, but more importantly, you should have seen mine. For the first time in a long time, I saw a man who was no longer afraid to stand up for himself. A man who understood that love and respect must go hand in hand. And as the stars came out over the lake, I knew I'd done the right thing. It's not just for me, but for my family and for the home that meant everything to us. In the days that followed, the villa was quieter than it had been in years. The echoes of confrontation still lingered in the air, but so did a new sense of order. I spent those first mornings tending the garden, repairing the small damages left behind, and letting the peace of the lake settle my nerves. But outside the villa's walls, a storm was brewing. Mark wasted no time in trying to sway Emily back to his side. He called her constantly, alternating between apologies and accusations. The next, he'd play the victim, painting himself as the one who'd been wronged. He even tried to rally other family members, cousins, in-laws, anyone who would listen, telling them I'd lost it and was locking everyone out of the family legacy. Some relatives took his side, calling to ask what had happened, their voices tinged with judgment. "Isn't it a bit harsh?" one cousin asked. "It's just a house, after all." Others, though, offered quiet support. My sister Margaret called every evening, reminding me that I had done the right thing. A few old friends from town stopped by with casseroles and kind words, sharing their own stories of hard-won boundaries and the peace that followed. Emily was caught in the middle, her heart pulled in two directions. She tried to mediate, urging me to reconsider, to find a compromise. I could see the pain in her eyes, the way she struggled to reconcile her love for her husband with her loyalty to me. We had long, difficult conversations, sometimes heated, sometimes tearful, about what family really meant, about respect and responsibility, about the difference between forgiveness and enabling. Mark, meanwhile, grew more desperate. He showed up at the villa one afternoon, pounding on the door and demanding to be let in. I stood my ground, calm but unyielding, repeating the boundaries I'd set. Emily watched from the window, her face pale, as Mark's anger boiled over. He hurled accusations, threatened to leave, then tried to guilt her into taking his side. But this time, something in Emily shifted. She didn't run after him. She didn't beg me to relent. Instead, she sat beside me on the porch, silent and thoughtful, as Mark's car disappeared down the road. The days turned into weeks, and slowly, the chaos began to subside. The phone calls from angry relatives dwindled, replaced by a respectful distance. Emily started spending more time at the villa, helping me with repairs, cooking meals, and sitting with me by the water in the evenings. We talked about everything: her marriage, her fears, her hopes for the future. She admitted that she'd felt trapped for a long time, torn between wanting to please Mark and wanting to honor the values she'd grown up with. I didn't see it before she told me one night, her voice barely above a whisper. I thought I was keeping the peace, but I was just letting things get worse. I'm sorry, Dad. I should have stood up for you and for myself sooner. I hugged her, feeling a weight lift from my shoulders. We all make mistakes, sweetheart. What matters is that we learn from them. Over time, the villa became a place of healing. The boundaries I'd set, once a source of conflict, became a foundation for new trust. Emily and I rebuilt our relationship, stronger and more honest than before. Even some of the family members who'd criticized me at first began to understand, reaching out to apologize or simply to reconnect. As for Mark, he eventually realized that manipulation and anger would get him nowhere. He and Emily spent some time apart, each reflecting on what they wanted and needed from their marriage. I don't know what the future holds for them, but I do know that Emily is stronger now, more certain of her own worth and the importance of standing up for what's right. Looking back, I see that the chaos and division were necessary steps on the path to clarity and healing. Setting boundaries wasn't easy. It cost me comfort, approval, and even some relationships I'd once cherished. But it also gave me back my peace, my dignity, and a deeper connection with my daughter. The villa, once a symbol of conflict, is now a place of respect and renewal. In the end, I learned that true family isn't about avoiding conflict or keeping everyone happy. It's about honesty, respect, and the courage to do what's right, even when it's hard. And as the sun sets over the lake, I know that I've finally found my way home. Peace, I've learned, is not the absence of conflict, but the presence of respect. In the months that followed the confrontation, the villa slowly transformed from a battleground back into a sanctuary. The air felt lighter, the rooms brighter, and the laughter that returned was genuine, not forced. For the first time in years, I could walk through my own home without bracing myself for disappointment or disrespect. Emily and I established new traditions: quiet breakfasts on the porch, evenings spent tending the garden, and long, honest conversations about the past and the future. She respected the new boundaries, always calling ahead, always asking before inviting anyone to join us. The villa became a place of healing, not just for me, but for her as well. We both learned that love doesn't mean saying yes to everything. Sometimes it means having the courage to say no. Family gatherings, once chaotic and tense, became smaller, but more meaningful. Those who truly valued the villa and what it represented returned with a new sense of appreciation. There were fewer people around the table, but more warmth in every exchange. The house was no longer a free-for-all, but a home. One built on mutual respect and understanding. I found myself reflecting often on the journey that had brought me here. For so long, I'd believed that sacrifice was the highest form of love. That giving without limit was the only way to keep a family together. But I see now that boundaries are not walls, they are bridges. They teach others how to treat us, and they protect the things we hold most dear. By standing up for myself, I didn't just reclaim my home, I reclaimed my sense of self-worth. The villa, once threatened by carelessness and entitlement, now stands as a testament to the power of self-respect. It is a place where memories are honored, where laughter is shared, where everyone who enters knows that kindness and gratitude are the only keys that open the door. If you're listening to my story and see yourself in it, I hope you'll remember this. You are not selfish for setting boundaries. You are not unkind for demanding respect. Sometimes the hardest thing you can do is stand up for yourself, especially when it means risking the approval of those you love. But in the end, it's worth it. You deserve peace. You deserve dignity. You deserve to be treated with the same care you give to others. So if you've ever felt taken for granted, if you've ever struggled to draw the line, know that you are not alone. I invite you to share your own stories of standing up, of reclaiming your space, of finding your voice. Together, we can remind each other that true family is built not just on love, but on respect. As I sit on the porch, watching the sun set over the lake, I feel a quiet pride. The villa is safe, my heart is lighter, and my family, though changed, is stronger for the trials we've faced. This is my new beginning, and I wouldn't trade it for anything.